Tom O'Connor, who is a senior foreign policy writer at Newsweek magazine. Tom, good to have you here with us.
Thank you.
Now, what do you make of this cyber attack?
Yeah, well, it certainly comes straight out of the playbook of hybrid warfare. I think that's clear to all sides of this. I think that both the U.S. and Russia are looking to use all the tools in their arsenal short of actual conflict before anything does erupt. And obviously, Russia is the one pushing the urgency here. That's certainly clear from the statements coming out, from the language going back even months right now. And I think that the pressure is really on right now. I actually just hours ago spoke with both Russian and U.S. officials after these talks that obviously played out in Europe. And what I can't stress enough is just how difficult the situation is becoming as far as wanting for diplomacy to prevail. I think both sides are not seeing the other side's point of view. I think there's a lot. I think both sides are still worlds apart in many ways. And I think it's creating a very dangerous situation on the ground.
Now, Tom, let me ask you what is on everyone's mind at the moment. Is an invasion of Ukraine, is another invasion of Ukraine by Russia inevitable?
I don't think it's inevitable, no. Whether it's going to happen, I guess we'll just have to see. We'll not know until it happens. I think it's that sort of thing. I think that certainly Russia is making its message clear what it wants, and I think the U.S. is also receiving that message, but not yet wanting to commit to any sort of specific agreements. We've seen Russia publish two proposal treaties, one to the U.S. and one to NATO. There's a lot of big asks in there, and some of them were dismissed right from the beginning. I think that some of those asks were very core points, talking about the removal of missile systems and obviously the halt to an eastward expansion of NATO towards Russia's borders, including Ukraine itself, of course. And the U.S. hasn't really seemed willing to engage on some of those bigger asks right now. So I think that until those bigger points are addressed, and until I think a wider consensus is reached on Eastern European security, the first rethinking of it really since the end of the Cold War 30 years ago, that a kinetic crisis, a conflict, will be a looming threat when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine border and perhaps other theaters as well.
Now, Tom, certainly the region of Eastern Europe has many stakeholders. For example, the European Union, as we saw in the report there by my colleague Francis Collins, the European Union has made it very clear that if Russia invades Ukraine again, it will have to pay a very heavy price. What would that be?
Well, we've seen, at least from the U.S. perspective, that the troop deployments, at least when it comes to Ukraine itself, was not necessarily an option. Economic sanctions are really being weighed here, and I've seen similar statements from the European Union side as well, that it seems that there will be an economic reaction to that. Now, whether that will be enough to stop Russia preemptively or after the fact, it doesn't seem to be the case, at least historically, with Russia's actions back in 2014 when the Ukraine conflict first erupted and the U.S. and Western powers had issues with Russia's reaction there. There were sanctions introduced, and I know these sanctions will be more unprecedented, but we're still talking about sanctions right now, and it's years later, and I'm not sure that there's been a demonstrated effect of those sanctions on Russia's decision-making process. So I'm not sure that will have the intended effect, but I think that there needs to be a reaction, at least as far as optics and as far as the West, concerning when it comes to the Ukraine issue. And also, I think that it's very clear that when it comes to NATO and the U.S., that this is an alliance that has set allies, has set boundaries. And while Ukraine's a prospective NATO member, it's not necessarily a NATO member. So I think that when it comes to whether there will be a military reaction, this would set a precedent that there will not be a military reaction, at least at this current stage. That's what it's looking like.
All right, Tom O'Connor, thank you very much. As always, we really appreciate your analysis.